Assalamu alaikum students. So today's lecture is about the internal structure of the spinal cord. Now when seen in the transverse section, the grey matter of the spinal cord, it consists of grey matter and white matter. So there is H-shaped grey matter surrounded by white matter. Now this grey matter H-shaped has got extensions at the limbs of the H alphabet. These are known as horns. So the anterior horns and the posterior horns, and in some regions of the spinal cord there are also lateral grey horns, and the central bar of the H is known as central grey commissure. Now this is the transverse section of the spinal cord. In each half of the cord, the grey matter is divisible into a larger ventral mass and the anterior grey column. You can see here. You can see here the larger anterior mass. This is known as anterior grey column, and a narrower elongated posterior grey column. In some parts of the spinal cord, a small lateral projection, here you can see, is seen between the ventral and the dorsal grey columns. This is the lateral grey column. So this one is the lateral horn or lateral grey column. The grey matter of the right and left half of the spinal cord is connected across the midline by the grey commissure, which is traversed by the central canal. The lower end of central canal expands to form the terminal ventricle, which lies in the conus medullaris region. Now the cavity within the spinal cord continues for a short distance into the filum terminale. The central canal of the spinal cord contains the cerebrospinal fluid, and it is lined by ependyma. Now the white matter of the spinal cord is divided into right and left halves in front by a deep anterior median fissure, and behind by the posterior median sulcus. In each half of this cord, the white matter medial to the dorsal grey column, here you can see this is the dorsal grey column, and white matter medial to the dorsal grey column is known as posterior funiculus. It forms the posterior funiculus or posterior white column. The white matter medial and ventral to the anterior grey column, it forms the anterior funiculus or anterior white column, while the white matter lateral to the anterior and posterior grey column, this area, it forms the lateral funiculus or lateral white column. The white matter of right and left halves of the spinal cord is continuous across the midline through the ventral white commissure, which lies anterior to the grey commissure. Here you can see some myelinated fibers running transversely in the grey commissure posterior to the central canal are referred to as dorsal white commissure. Now if we visualize the grey matter, spinal grey matter in 3 dimensions, we see that each so-called horn is more like a long vertical pillar. You can see here long vertical pillars. Pillars are also called columns, and that is why the anterior and posterior horns are now referred to as the anterior and posterior grey columns. Now the relative amount of grey matter and white matter and the shape and size of grey columns vary at different levels of the spinal cord. The amount of grey matter to be seen at particular level can be correlated with the mass of tissue to be supplied. It is therefore greatest in the region of cervical and lumbar enlargements. Why? You have to tell me in the assignment. The amount of white matter undergoes progressive increase as we proceed up in the spinal cord. The amount of white matter undergoes progressive increase. So you can see here, this is the coccygeal region, this is the sacral, this is the lumbar, and this is the thoracic, and then the cervical. So amount of white matter is also increasing. Now this is also the assignment question. You have to tell me why the amount of white matter it increases as we go up into the spinal cord. So the grey matter of the spinal cord may be subdivided in more than one manner. Traditionally, the ventral grey horn column has been divided into a ventral part, which is known as the head, and a dorsal part, which is known as the base. Similarly, the dorsal grey column has been subdivided from anterior to posterior side into, this is the anterior side, this is the base, the narrow part is known as neck, and then the last part is the head, which lies posteriorly. Now these subdivisions have, however, been found to have little importance. Now nuclei in the spinal grey matter, the neurons of the ventral grey column, ventral horn cells, are arranged in the form of several discrete and elongated groups. We can recognize a medial group. This one is the medial group, which may be divided into a dorsomedial group and a ventrolateral group, ventrolateral part. So this is the medial group of the anterior ventral grey horn, and it is divided into two parts, a dorsomedial part and a ventrolateral part. Then the lateral group, here is the lateral group. You can see this is the lateral group consisting of a dorsolateral part and a ventrolateral part, dorsolateral part, ventrolateral part, and retrodorsolateral part. This one is the retrodorsolateral part. Then the central group, it is represented by the phrenic and accessory nuclei in the cervical region and by the lumbosacral nucleus in the lumbosacral region. Now within the dorsal grey column, the following relatively discrete areas may be recognized. The substantia gelatinosa, which lies near the apex or the head. So this is the substantia gelatinosa, which lies near the head. The nucleus proprius, then the nucleus proprius, this one. Then the dorsal nucleus of Clark lying on the medial side of the base. Dorsal nucleus of Clark lying on the medial side of the base. A thin layer of cells lying superficial to the substantia gelatinosa, and it constitutes the posteromarginal nucleus, also called the marginal zone. So this is the marginal zone, this is the substantia gelatinosa, this is the nucleus proprius, and these are the nucleus dorsalis or Clark's column. Between the ventral and dorsal grey columns, the intermediate zone is sometimes described. This contains the intermediolateral and intermediomedial groups. So here you can see intermediomedial and intermediolateral nuclei. So as in other regions of the central nervous system, the grey matter of the spinal cord consists of mixture of nerve cells and their process, neuroglia and blood vessels. The nerve cells are multipolar and the neuroglia forms an intricate network around the nerve cell bodies and their neurites. Now nerve cell groups in the anterior horn, interior grey column. Most nerve cells are large multipolar, which are located in this anterior horn, and their axons pass out in the anterior root, which is present here, of the spinal nerve as alpha efferents, which innervate the skeletal muscles. The smaller nerve cells are also multipolar, and axons of many of these pass out in the anterior roots of the spinal nerve as gamma efferents, which innervate the intrafusal muscle fibers of the neuromuscular spindles. Now for practical purposes, the nerve cells of the anterior grey column may be divided into three basic groups or columns. As I have told you before, the medial one, the central one and the lateral one. The medial group is present in most segments of the spinal cord and is responsible for innervating of the skeletal muscles of the neck and trunk, including the intercostal and abdominal musculature. So these are present in most of the segments of the spinal cord, and they innervate the neck and the trunk muscles. Now the central group is the smallest and is present in the cervical region and the lumbosacral segments. Now in the cervical part of the cord, some of these nerve cells specially innervate the diaphragm and are collectively referred to as the phrenic nucleus. In the upper 5 or 6 cervical segments, some of the nerve cells innervate the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscles and are referred to as accessory nucleus. The axons of these cells from the spinal part of the axons of these cells, they form the spinal part of the accessory nerve. Now the lumbosacral nucleus present in the second lumbar down to first sacral segment of the cord is made up of nerve cells whose axons have an unknown distribution. Now the lateral group is present in the cervical and lumbosacral segments of the cord, and it is responsible for innervating the muscles of the skeletal muscles of the limbs. So the nerve cell groups in the posterior grey column. There are 4 nerve cell groups of the posterior grey column, 2 that extend throughout the length of the cord and 2 that are restricted to the thoracic and lumbar segments. The substantia gelatinosa group, this is the substantia gelatinosa group, you can see here, substantia gelatinosa group is situated at the apex of the posterior grey column throughout the length of spinal cord. So substantia gelatinosa is present throughout the length of spinal cord. It is largely composed of Golgi type 2 neurons, and it receives afferent fibers which are concerned with the pain, temperature and touch from the posterior root. Furthermore, it receives input from the descending fibers from supraspinal levels. It is believed that inputs of the sensation of pain and temperature are modified by excitatory or inhibitory information from other sensory inputs and by the information from the cerebral cortex. Now the nucleus proprius is a group of large nerve cells situated anterior to the substantia gelatinosa. So this is the nucleus proprius, and this nucleus constitutes the main bulk of the cells present in the posterior grey column, and it receives fibers from the posterior white column that are associated with sense of position and movement, 2-point discrimination and vibration. Then comes the nucleus dorsalis or Clark's column. It is a group of nerve cells situated at the base of the posterior grey column and extending from the 8th cervical segment caudally to the 3rd to 4th lumbar segment. Most of the cells are comparatively large and are associated with proprioceptive endings. So proprioceptive fibers are coming here. So this is the nucleus, Clark's nucleus or dorsal column. Then come the visceral efferent nucleus, is a group of nerve cells of medium size situated lateral to the nucleus dorsalis. So somewhere here they are located, and they are of medium size, and it extends from the first thoracic to third lumbar segments of the spinal cord. It is believed to be associated with receiving the visceral afferent information. Now, nerve cell groups in the nerve cell group in the posterior column, some extend throughout the length and some extend only to certain segments. So, nerve cell groups in the lateral gray column. The intermediolateral group, you can see here the one shown in the green. So, they form the small lateral swellings, and which extend from the first thoracic to the second or third lumbar segment of the spinal cord. The cells are relatively small and give rise to preganglionic sympathetic fibers. A small group of cells found in second, third and fourth sacral segments of the spinal cord give rise to the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. So, sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers arises from these nerve cell groups in the lateral gray column. Now, as I have told you, in the transverse section of the spinal cord, the anterior and the posterior gray columns on each side are connected by the transverse gray commissure. The gray matter resembles the letter H. In the center of the gray commissure is situated the central canal. You can see here. The part of the gray commissure that is situated posterior to the central canal is often referred to as the posterior gray commissure. Similarly, the part of the gray commissure that lies anterior to this canal is called the anterior gray commissure. So studies have shown that from point of view of neuronal connections, the gray matter of the spinal cord may be divided into 10 areas or laminae. Now, laminae 1, you can see here in this diagram here, laminae 1 corresponds to the postero-marginal nucleus, the lamina marginalis, postero-marginal nucleus. Lamina 2 to the substantia gelatinosa, lamina 3 and 4 to the nucleus proprius, and lamina 1 to 4 correspond to the head of the gray dorsal gray column. Now, lamina 5 corresponds to the neck of the dorsal gray column, and lamina 6 to the base. So, you can see here the lateral part of lamina 5 corresponds to the formatio reticularis, that is the reticular nuclei. Lamina 6 corresponds to the intermediate gray matter and includes the intermediomedial and intermediolateral and dorsal nuclei. Lamina 6. Lamina 7. It is believed to be made up predominantly of interneurons. At the level of cervical and lumbar enlargements, this lamina extends into the lateral part of the ventral horn. Now, lamina 8, here lamina 8 occupies most of the ventral horn in the thoracic segments, but at the level of the limb, enlargement is confined to the medial part of the ventral horn. Now, lamina 9 is made up of various discrete group of ventral horn cells. Now, lamina 10, it forms the gray matter around the central canal. From the point of view of function and of the neuronal organization, it has been proposed that the spinal gray column should be divided into a central core where the organization of neurons is diffused and non-discriminative, and into the dorsal and ventral appendages. Lamina 7 and 8 have been assigned to the central core, and lamina 1 to 4 to the dorsal appendage, and lamina 9 to the ventral appendage. The central canal is present throughout the spinal cord, and superiorly it is continuous with the central canal of the caudal half of the medulla oblongata. So you can see here, this is the superiorly it is continuous with the central canal of the medulla oblongata, and above this it opens into the cavity of the fourth ventricle. Inferiorly, in the conus medullaris, it expands to form the fusiform terminal ventricle and terminates below within the root of the filum terminale. It is filled with cerebrospinal fluid and is lined with ciliated columnar epithelium, the ependyma. Thus, the central canal is closed inferiorly and opens superiorly into the fourth ventricle. Now, the white matter of the spinal cord, it is a collection of nerve fibers within the central nervous system that connects the two masses of the grey matter, and these are called as tracts. A tract may be defined as collection of nerve fibers having the same origin, the course and the termination. Tracts may be ascending or descending. They are usually named after the masses of grey matter connected by them. Thus, a tract beginning in the cerebral cortex and descending to the spinal cord is known as corticospinal tract, while a tract ascending from the spinal cord to the thalamus is known as spinothalamic tract. Now, tracts are sometimes referred to as fasciculi, bundles, or laminiski. Fasciculi means bundle shaped or laminiski means ribbon shaped. The major tracts passing through the spinal cord and brain stem are the ascending and the descending tracts. So, in case of ascending tracts, there are lateral spinothalamic tract, anterior spinothalamic tract, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, dorsal spinocerebellar tract, ventral spinocerebellar tract, spino-olivary tract, spinotectal tract, and spinoreticular tract. And in case of descending tracts, the lateral corticospinal tracts, rubrospinal tract, medullary reticulospinal tract, lateral vestibulospinal tract, pontine reticulospinal tract, tectospinal tract, and anterior corticospinal tract. So, these are the descending tracts which are going from the higher centers towards the spinal cord.